Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another 401 Access Denied podcast. It's exciting to be here. We've got myself, Joseph Carson, Chief Security Scientist at Thycotic, joining you from Tallinn, Estonia, and my awesome co-host, Mike, who's joining me today for another awesome episode. So, Mike, take it away.
Very excited. Mike Rowan, VP of Engineering and CISO at Cybrary. I think today's episode will be very good. I always think that, right? But we're talking today about hygiene with regard to kids and security specifically, and just online and behaviors and how we can help our kids to really be safe and secure online. Something that Joe and I have some firsthand experience dealing with our own kids. And so we thought we'd pass on some knowledge.
Absolutely. And this, for me, it goes back, I've got really passionate about this. And it goes back into, there's multiple aspects as well at this. There's one is getting kids to understand about what, security and hygiene is all about. But it's also the parents as well, because sometimes, the parents' bad habits reflect on the children as well. And then even gets into also the school teachers as well. Their, lack of understanding about security, and also a lot of them, moving to being able to do things remotely and online also exposes a greater amount of risks as well. So for me, I think this is something that goes out. And years ago, I thought I went into, teaching kids at school, this program called Back to School. And I thought I was going to be actually, teaching them something. But to be honest, I learned a lot about some of the, and some of the scary things as well around where kids' security hygiene and where their password hygiene is at, where they choose very simple things and they share it with their friends. And many of them even share their devices with their friends as well. And that exposes great risks. And I think many kids, really don't understand about the threats that's out there. They don't understand about where things get stored. When people take pictures on their phone and they're using apps like, maybe Instagram or TikTok or other types of apps, and they're putting the pictures on there, they still think it's somewhat stored on the phone itself. They don't realize that it's actually been, taken through the airs, through the internet, and stored on some server elsewhere in the world. That is somewhat kind of, I guess they maybe ignore it or are not familiar with it, or just purely haven't been educated to understand about how the internet actually works.
Yeah, no, I think there's a whole lot of foundational stuff. I know I spend a lot of time with my kids. First of all, so we have a Mac at home, which I think is great because they use they were using Windows at school, Mac at home, and then also as little kids, I got a Linux distribution that was specific for kids. It's I don't know if it's still out there, so I'm not, and I can't remember the name of it. But there's definitely these Linux distros that are specifically designed for kids that have just games and other learning activities. They can learn to program and stuff like that. I think the biggest benefit my kids got out of that was understanding that not all computers are identical, like that there's these different operating systems, this concept of folders and directories and local storage versus what's happening on a server. Like it just sort of helped to make that conversation a little more just easier conversation to sort of explain how this computer here has a hard drive. We back it up, and some of that information is backed up to this other hard drive here, and some of it's backed up to a cloud. What's a cloud? And I think just sort of getting kids to understand some of that, and obviously, the capacity for a kindergartner or a first grader is very different than a fifth grader or a middle school kid. But just getting them to understand some of those basic concepts. I mean, I think about just take a step back and think about TV. When I was growing up, when Joe was, we watched what was on the TV, like
live.
Right. It was like, what's on tonight? Like, oh, at 5:00, this is going to be on. And so I know so many parents have this exact experience of when, you turn on the TV and the kids are like, oh, I want to watch blah, blah, blah. And you're like, well, blah, blah, blah is not on right now. Like that's not because they have so much on-demand and streaming services. It's very, very similar. That same sort of having to explain the difference between TV in the old days over the air versus streaming services. Where does this actually come from? It's all sort of interrelated. I think kids getting an understanding of that's an important part of understanding how computers sort of interoperate with each other. So yeah.
Yeah, I did recently. I had my kids and a bunch of their school friends come to my place to actually have a whole session on security. And it was quite interesting to listen to. One is, listen to what the kids' concerns were and the risks they thought, and also listen to the parents as well. So just getting a reflection of kind of just the different kind of viewpoints and the risks. And one of the things I started off with was making sure that, they all understood about how, first of all, they get connected to the internet, because sometimes I think that's important as well, is that whether they're connected directly through, their mobile phone and 4G or the mobile devices, are they connected to a public Wi-Fi, or are they connected to their, family or, home networking, directly to an internet connection? So just getting one is the differences of how they get connected, and about the risks, and also making sure that when they see, public Wi-Fi access points, about just how to be able to tell and understand about some questions you might want to ask about, is this a real Wi-Fi connection that maybe the cafe or the school or whatever is providing, and make sure it's not somebody just doing, basically a rogue hotspot type of connection.
Right.
So that's where I started, was just about how they get connected in the first place, and you understand about, for most kids, they're just using, the 4G connection that they have in their phone, and not really, caring about anything else. So that's where I find kind of most of their connectivity.
That's funny, because, just take a pause there, the devices we get for our kids don't have any of that. Like, we always go Wi-Fi only, no mobile, no mobile. This way we have a lot more control. My kids are definitely more sheltered because of it, probably. So, but yeah, that's a great point. The whole Wi-Fi versus 3G, 4G, 5G, whatever it is. That definitely is a conversation. I have a middle school kid. We still have to sort of remind, like, no, this is how it works. Like, because it's just radio waves. It's so abstract, I think, for a kid to continue to remember and know the difference. But yeah, and being able to identify what's a good Wi-Fi network to get on, that's a great place to start, Joe.
Yep, absolutely. I think really took in from that as well. We end up doing looking at their apps as well on the phones. And it was interesting, depending on the age group as well. I find that the younger age group, they were around 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, that apps, things like Snapchat and WhatsApp or TikTok and those types of communication apps, there's ones that they use to communicate to each other, and then there's ones that they just like to watch things like handicrafts, how to do simple things, or how to learn something, or just interesting things, whether it being girls looking at makeup, or boys looking at football tricks and stuff like that. Just different things that they're interested in. Now, one thing I did find is that some of those social apps that they only have installed, but they actually don't contribute. They're not uploading anything. They're not sending anything. They're just there watching and observing. So that was an interesting aspect, is that, for some, maybe it's good that they don't have an account, that they can actually just do it anonymously without contributing and sending pictures and stuff. So that's one thing I think it'd be good to make sure that, parents are aware, is one is when they're using these types of apps out there, is one is that, are they actually contributing to them, or are they just observing the data and consuming it? And that's a key kind of differentiating. And that's important to understand which apps that they're actually contributing to. Because when you get into things like TikTok, that those apps are collecting so much information about them, the picture locations, the EXIF information, that's geographical locations, what's around, what other pictures they've got in their phones and so forth. And there's a lot of data that gets collected, so it's really important to understand about how they're using the app. And that was new to me when I did that lesson.
So yeah, I would take even a step back on. So I don't think a lot of parents go to the extent that I forced upon my wife, and that I do, which is really going through the parental controls and setting things up. My kids can't just install any app that they want on their device. There's age limits. There's all kind. There's certain ones that they can do, and then I can override and say, yeah, no, I'll give them access to that. And I think it's just created a really healthy conversation, because it's not usually that I say, no, you can't install the app. It's just, oh, what are you planning on using that app for? Oh, okay, cool. You want to watch these things. And then, like, they understand no, I'm not going to be uploading. I'm now starting to have a conversation with my middle school kid about, he wants to start a YouTube channel. Like, what are you going to put up there? Like, what's the point? Like, is this just to record your own personal diary? If that's or journal, whatever you want to call it. Like, if that's the case, like, you don't need YouTube and have it out in the world to do that. Right. And so I think I look at the parental controls not as a gatekeeping function, but rather as a way of making sure that we're communicating and talking, and that I have some idea of what they're doing, and so that I can help them to do it in the best way possible.
Yes, sit down with them and look at the settings, look at
Right.
what it can do, look at what the purpose is. So I think it's great, doing that. I completely agree. It creates that conversation. It also makes it open for the kids to be able to communicate with the parents about what they're intending to use it for.
Right.
Maybe the parents can then look at the risks and the privacy policies and collectively sit together and go through and make sure that you have some set of expectations.
Mhm.
Because one thing my concern is that when the kids go to other people's houses or they use other people's phones, that's where they start, that's where the risks start happening, because some parents don't have the same kind of,
Right.
let's say, restrictions that we have, is that they might just say, oh, yeah, install any app, and they're free to do so. And then what happens is that other kids are, they become popular, and all of a sudden other kids are saying they want to sit and use their phone. So it ends up, rather than the restrictions you set in place, is that now that's open for them, because other kids can, share the phones with them.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think, and that's why it's good that it's a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think, just taking a step back, I think I think you and I, because we're in this space, sort of take for granted maybe a little bit of like knowing what
Mm-hmm.
the location information, what XF, there's still so much around. I don't think people realize how much information is in a picture that's in the metadata.
Yeah.
It's not in the photo, it's in information stored within the picture that contains information about where it was taken, when it was taken.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really helpful. If you're, if you have lots and lots of pictures, being able to organize by location and stuff like that. I know iPhoto has all those capabilities. I don't use them. I turn it all off. I have a control on my phone that says, don't ever, you don't store the location information with the picture, because I don't care. I don't need it. I don't want it in there. I don't want to have to think about it. But it's always all those settings are always on by default. And I think it's important to understand that. And a really simple thing to do is go into the devices the kids use and just turn it off, so that the location information is never stored with the pictures they're taking. Mm-hmm. It's just that's a good first step, right? Understanding what you can and can't control. And I think that there's not a lot of information for parents about what they can and can't control on their own devices, on their kids' devices. And I think similarly, I'm probably one of the few people that runs a Mac and every kid has their own account. My wife has her own account. There's an admin account, there's my account, my kids' accounts. I don't think that people go to that extent. Most people have a family Mac or a family computer, whether it's a PC or
and
Mac.
Sharing
and share. Everybody has access to everything, which has its own, there's all kinds of concerns that you then that you run into. I think that just gets into family hygiene, right? Do I really want to take the risk that my kid can accidentally do something that's going to impact my online banking?
Purchasing something,
right?
It's the one with the game, I think it was the in-app purchases that all of a sudden the kids are just using the app and just purchasing, and parents didn't realize. I've seen incidents in the past where thousands of euros and dollars of bills all of a sudden because of that shared account.
Right. Yeah, there's the shared account. And then, and I think just in terms of I go through I jump through a lot of hoops to my banking is done in a virtual machine. I jump through a lot of hoops. I don't expect anybody to do what I do with regard to how I secure my little environment to make sure that things aren't happening. But I do think that you got to come up with what hoops you're willing to jump through. And I think having multiple accounts on a computer is a reasonable first step. And same thing, it's a lot harder on devices. There's not much you can do if your kid has, phones aren't considered multi-user devices. So that's something, you want to think about. And that's one of the advantages to buying your kid their own device. And then you can put the parental controls on, you can lock it, you can manage it. Just something to consider.
But what I would love to be able to do is that, those are always things you have to do after. It's things that you have to set up after. It's not, it's that all the devices are the same. And they are not, let's say, automatically switched to, kid-friendly mode. They don't switch to parent mode, or they don't switch to sharing mode.
Right.
I would love that, the vendors really step up and take an approach that, this phone, rather than saying that, sometimes out there you can't go and buy kid-friendly phones, but they're mostly focused around, was it versatility and dropping them and other things like that. They have limited features. But at the end of the day, most are going to go to shop and buy the same phone. Right. And ultimately, what you want to be able to do is say, into mode, is that this phone will be used for this age group, and it automatically will default to they actually do the right settings, rather than me having to be the responsible, and go through and try to understand. Because most parents out there don't. We've, in our roles, we've taken that step to educate ourselves into, things like screen time and limited app functionality, and going into the privacy controls. And, those are lots of steps. And for most parents, that's something that, they're not familiar with. And it's a lot to go and educate. So I think really we do need the industry to step up and help and make it easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think not only that, the maintaining it, it does get to be a little bit of a burden, especially when they're younger. All of the hoops I had to jump through in order to do like the simplest, like, oh, let's install a Minecraft mod. It's like, okay, they can't do this themselves. They can't go to any of the websites because of the parental controls. Like, but I also didn't want them being able to just like install, random stuff on the computer. So it was hoops I was willing to jump through, but it definitely was like, well, you're gonna have to wait till Saturday when I have time to do this, because I'm not, and it's 5 minutes. It's not a big thing. It's just the sort of more the mental hurdle of I'm going to go sit down and do Minecraft now. But yeah, I think that they're right. You have to find the right balance for you. And I agree. It would be great if the manufacturer stepped up. It would be great if I could have a device, my phone, and I could just slide it into like, hey, I want to give it to my kid now. And I think there might be some like hacky things one might be able to do with like turning on and off restrictions. But again, it's like, it's stuff that you have to do. It's not as seamless. I will say, in terms of parental controls, some are doing it way better than others. Absolutely. And kudos to Microsoft. Like I don't give a lot of love to Microsoft. I feel like, but recently, just the amount of that I can control what's happening on my son's gaming laptop and on the Xbox, and and then it tracks all of these things, and that it's the time that he spends on his Xbox and the time he spends on his laptop, it's the same time. He gets 2 hours a day. It doesn't matter where he spends it, as opposed to Apple, which he can spend 2 hours on the iPad, 2 hours on the Mac, 2 hours on this other device, and it's a total of 6 hours. So I do like the how Microsoft has sort of approached parental controls.
Yeah, I think both Microsoft and Apple have really, kind of up there when it comes to, focusing around parents and ease of use. They've really kind of stepped up, both of them.
Yes, definitely. And I also like that. Yeah, and I also like that. I think you sort of set somewhere along the way, you put their age in or something, so that you're not every year having to revisit these settings. Like it's sort of goes up with them, which is great, right? Right, exactly. The lower the effort, the more likely parents are to use it. And I think they just don't do a great job of educating people about those controls.
I think also one of the things as well that I find is even the recent iOS 14 update is that now they have the visibility of the the lights that show if the camera's been used or the microphone's been used, because that was always an issue in the past. Is that you don't know if the camera's on by an app, or you don't know if the microphone's recording. And I think this is really going about making sure that it's transparent to the user about what's happening on the device as well.
Yeah, actually, for my Mac, I've installed something called MicroSnitch that basically watches all of the audio and video that's happening, and it does a little pop up to let me know like app such and such is accessing the microphone, app such and such is accessing the video camera. I did it mostly at work because I'm on so many Zooms and WebExes and this and that frequently I'd be like, why is the light on the camera on? I can't figure out which software is still running this. Right, what app thinks it should be using it. But I found it to be great. Like it just gives me that sense of like, okay, cool. I can go into this thing. It shows me the whole log. It's great. And it's like dirt cheap. So definitely highly recommend looking into those types of solutions.
Yeah. So two of the things that came up during the lessons that I had with the kids a few weeks ago was that one was around, as they're uploading pictures and taking pictures and sharing it, that they didn't realize is that copies of those pictures have been stored in other servers around the world. And then we also get into discussing around, password hygiene. And password hygiene was a bit of a, one is that, they had 4 number pins. So most of it was pins, still using pins, and pins still was predominantly the method of protecting systems. Some had moved to 6 digits. Of course, we use newer devices that kind of force and updates to force 6-digit pins. So the first thing was around pictures. They were actually quite alarmed that when they took a picture with the phone and added to an app, that it was actually being stored in other servers in other countries, and they didn't realize that, which is quite shocking. What's your thoughts around how do you make sure that all kids are aware that no matter what they do on the phone, that there's potentially other copies of it stored elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I have that conversation. I also, because like the U.S. laws also come in a little bit. So I try and educate my kids. I mean, I remember I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but when I was growing up, my mom, the police came to school to fingerprint all the kids under this like guise of, well, if your kid is lost or whatever, we want their fingerprints on record so that we can help, find them or whatever, or this way, we can identify them. And my mom was like, absolutely not. We're not letting the police fingerprint you. Like, if I can't identify the body, then, like whatever. Right. So there was this very healthy, like my mom indoctrinated me to this very healthy skepticism of the government. All this to say that I'm doing the same thing with my kids. And so I know the laws. I know that like you have no right to privacy if you store things on a server. Like the laws just have not caught up. You can still, the police in the US can still go through email because email is always stored on the server now. The laws have just never changed from back in the day when you actually had to go every day and download your email. So email would only sit up on a server for a matter of hours, maybe a day or 2 days. And so, I also get into some of that as well, which is like, hey, by doing this, like you're also just understand your own, not just that this company now has access to this information, but think about all of the people that potentially could get access to this as you, and that might include the government. It might include bad actors. It might, whether those are the same people
lots
or not.
of advertisements,
right? Advertisers, right?
To start advertising the kids. So
right. And I think having that conversation around, free and understanding, like if something is free, then really you're the product. Like that's an important part. Like understand that any time you're doing anything that where you're giving information, whether it's a picture, whether it's your own name, whatever it is that you're giving to this app, like that's information that they're collecting about you. And by the way, I don't want to sound like I'm some sort of like anti-government, because I know for a fact the US government does not have the capacity to do all of the analysis that Google does. I know that Google has a far better profile of me than anyone else. And understanding that and helping my kids to understand like what's the benefit, and not just from a negative side. Like there's benefits. You get targeted advertising. Some people like targeted advertising.
Yeah, but there was an interesting. I watched recently. It was the Social Dilemma. I don't know if you had.
Yeah, I've watched that recently as well.
And for me, it was quite. I was always the same opinion as well. It was that if it was free, then we are the product.
Right.
But I think when I watched that, there was a couple of things that actually triggered that took me to thinking a bit differently. Is that that it's not me, it's my time. It's time is the product. And that was a kind of key differentiating for me. And personalization was also something that concerned me as well, is that one of the people on the show itself had mentioned that imagine that if every Wikipedia page was unique to everyone who looked at it. And that's what personalization today is becoming, is that we're not, everyone who's looking at information is seeing different things. And that was also a very kind of intriguing perception that I hadn't really kind of thought about before, that it was that extreme. So those were two things that I took away from kind of looking at. It's definitely for any parents. I definitely have them recommend to watch it. They can take away the things that are applicable to them, and things are probably a bit stretched in some regards, but it was very educational.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think because I'm in there was nothing really. Like there wasn't some big aha moment or anything like that, like, because we're in the industry, whatever, but it definitely did reinforce some of the things that I already thought, and reinforce it in a very like powerful, strong way around some of the algorithms and why is there this polarization? And it's because of, well, all of these algorithms, all these machine learning algorithms are all designed to show you what you're interested in. And so it's just this natural thing where the only things you're just going to see smaller and smaller pieces, like, but, and this is sort of going again on a tangent, but I do think it's an important lesson for kids to understand, like, what is it that you're seeing, and that this is going to be tailored to you a little bit. And this isn't it might feel like this is what everybody sees, but it's not. It's actually very small based on you. There might be 5% of the world that has this view, but there's 5% of the world is still a large number of people, enough people that you have this content. And that's how you can get these like weird theories, and you feel like, no, why everybody else is insane, I'm the sane person. And I think kids understanding how these algorithms, like, they don't have to understand how the algorithms work, but they have to understand like what the consequences are.
Yeah, right. I think what influences the algorithms, I think that's what's key, and I think for me that's one of the things that everyone's missing, right? Is that when my kids are watching different TV programs and they have their own profiles, that all of a sudden one is kind of getting upset because why is my brother getting to see everything and I'm not seeing the same things? Why can't I see those things as well? They're not showing in my profile, right? And you get into that, and that was that point in time when they were seeing different personalization. That was a good time to reinforce that message. But it's because of things that you've looked at in the past. Right. That's what actually, there's an algorithm behind there that's actually trying to tailor preferences to you. And I think what organizations fail to do is make that transparent, make it visible. But so we can say, no, actually, that was one thing I looked at that briefly for a few seconds should not change what I see in the future. It should, we should be able to control that history of choices.
Yeah, definitely. Although I will say this. So I do a lot with browsing in private mode and all these other things to make it so that those algorithms don't have as much of an impact, ad blockers, things like that. The downside to that is that my kid, especially for my kids, if I do the same thing on their devices, then basically what they're going to see is a lot of whatever is generally popular as the algorithm is trying to figure out, well, what are you interested in? It's got to start somewhere. So it's going to start with the most popular things. So suddenly my 9-year-old is seeing ads for The Walking Dead, which maybe that's not what he should be seeing, right? But that's where it's starting because it doesn't know that it shouldn't be showing it to him. So I think there's like this, like, as much as I hate that stuff, there is some benefits to it being a little more targeted to him, so he's not seeing those ads. So he sees the ads for Jurassic World, not for The Walking Dead.
Yeah, and those algorithms they get so confused many times, and they throw things up that's somewhat shocking. I've set the limitations of age restrictions from the browsing content, and I've set limitations in regards to even the ad blockers and what comes in at home, and all those things. There's everything you do, but the algorithms will always they're not perfect. And therefore, things will get through. And it's a case of us.
Well, actually, that's part of the algorithm, though. Like, having worked on those algorithms, one of the things you need to do is you do need to throw random crap that you like. The point, it's testing the algorithm to make sure, like, I think this person's not interested in this thing, so I'm going to actually show it to them and prove that they're not interested in this thing. So, otherwise, the algorithm gets so tailored that it's just going to show you the same 3 ads over and over and over again. So they definitely need to throw random crap at you every now and then to sort of make sure that it's not too, to help tune it. But I think getting back to your point, right, I lock down the computer, I lock down the network at home, I do this, I lock down their devices. That does me no good when they're at a friend's house and watching on their friend's device.
That's always the challenge. And one thing, is I recommend for all the parents out there as well, is that when your child first gets a device, make a contract with them. Make an agreement, set the boundaries, set the limitations. Basically, both our kids, we had these page-long contracts about that they had to sign up to. That was all about, how much time they're going to be spending, about prioritizations, about things that they had to do before they were allowed, about what types of apps are allowed to play, about also sharing and allowing us to see what's on the device wherever we want to. They are not allowed in the bedrooms. Away. They had to be able to show us what they're viewing on the screen, and they had to be able to show us what they viewed in the past. We had contracts, and I definitely think is that setting those contracts is a good way to set up the conversation, have the right communication, and set the right expectations as well. That's always critical, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and it was mentioned that documentary as well, which is if you ask your kid how many hours a week or how many hours a day do you want to spend on devices, they actually give very reasonable answers. I think that the problem is that the way these things are designed. They're designed to be addictive. They're designed to just keep you sucked in and reading more, like one more thing. And so you lose track of time. And we all have that experience. We all have that experience of like I had that experience this morning where I needed to Slack Joe. So I opened up my phone, and then I was like, oh wait, this other thing popped up, and now I'm down a rabbit hole. And then it's like, oh, nuts, I have 5 minutes and I meant to Slack him, 20 minutes ago. So, I think we all have that experience. And I think that's also part of understanding the hygiene and helping kids to understand that like these devices can be good and but just recognize that time and that it's really easy to sort of lose track of it. And as I said, most kids don't want to spend 3 hours or 6 hours on the device. If you were to ask them, like my son's some frequently will be like, it'll be the end of the day and they'll sort of be like, oh, I have to go to bed soon. I didn't do these other things that I wanted to do. It's like, yeah, because you were playing on the Switch. Like that's what you did instead of going for a bike ride. Like that was your decision.
So what I've done is, recently I sat down and I explained is that there is a big difference between what device you're using and what you're using it for. And absolutely, you're completely right. Is that technology can be used for good. It can be, there's great things that we can use with technology. There's a lot of things we can learn and, observe and get new, skills and ideas from.
Right.
There's many different things. So what I've actually sat down with the kids as well, if I separated into different devices into different categorizations, and some devices can be used for multiple. And I said into is that there's things that you can do that, I'm reading books, I'm doing audiobooks. Those are educational. I'm listening and learning from them. So there's things that you can actually do with technology that is educational. So there's educational time. So I allow the kids into time that is allowed for educational, and that's separated from the entertainment type of category. There's the things that are just for entertainment, whether being playing, with Switch or PlayStation or games. There's things that you do that are just entertainment. They're about, enjoyable, about, emotions, about, observations, and sometimes just passing time. But then there's the wasted time category. That's so I have actually separated them into different things, and I've set time limits in each areas. And I want them to balance. I want them to spend more time in the educational side of things. I don't mind them doing some things that is just purely entertainment, that, watching a joke or watching something or playing a game with friends, some social aspect of things. But I don't want them to wasting time scrolling on feeds. I don't want them to waste time just basically watching, things that are basically pointless.
It's interesting where we draw the lines, right? Like, because what I think of as being pointless, I think you and I probably talked about this before, right? I'll watch a hockey game. I enjoy watching hockey. I can't play hockey. And then I watch my kids watching they're watching some group of people playing Minecraft. I'm like, what a total waste of time. Like you're watching other people play a video game. But to them, that is entertainment. I sort of, there's a very fine line between entertainment and total waste of time. And yes, but you definitely want to limit things and you want to have an understanding. And I couldn't agree more. And I think
so that it's definitely having those separations. Watching a TV is entertainment. Using a computer or a phone that has something learning can be educational. My kids have been doing homeschools, periodically, and I have to understand that the time they're spending doing homeschool is educational. It's sitting on a screen, but it's also there's a learning aspect, and we have to make sure that we have clear separation or observation of those.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the other on the educational side, I think there's enough. There's a number of content creators out there that are really creating high quality content for kids that's very educational, that isn't just for kids. I enjoy watching them as well. There's one the name of it's German and I can't remember it, but it translates to like in a nutshell or something along those lines. And they just do a great job of like, it's like a 5 to 15 minute, I don't even know, maybe 20 minutes, just video, explaining things. and there's like a whole series on ants. And what I find with my kids is that they really want to watch those things. They're educational, they're interesting. We can have conversations. They had an episode on, are we living in a simulation? Like
the Matrix.
Like right. But for kids. And it was, they got some things right. They got some things wrong. And they said it right off the bat, like, hey man, like we don't pretend like we know everything. We're probably going to get a lot of stuff wrong, but here's the general gist of it. And I'll tell you, it's great to watch those things with my kids. I love it because then we can have conversations about it. And I know that they're, it's not that just watching somebody do a thing. It's actually learning a little bit more about the world as a whole. So yeah, I think there's some really great content. I think, it's up to us to help our kids find it. But what I find amazing is how much of it my kids find on their own and bring to us. And then it's like, oh, wow, this is really cool. And I think there's some that, schools are obviously finding and using. Before we started recording, I mentioned Brain Pop is one that my school uses and my kids have used. And I say the content's great. There's all the stuff on science and politics. Well, not politics as much as like social studies and civics, history, technology. The context was that it has a great episode on how email works and how like there's these servers and how messages are sent and it gets back. And it really, I think, helped my kids to better understand how computers communicate with each other and how we use computers to communicate with each other, even though, email is so, 1990 and not really used by kids, it's the same concepts. It's the same things, right? There's no difference really. And so, so that was really helpful. Seeing like, hey, you understand like this email, this message, generally speaking, most messages that you're sending on the internet are postcards. They're not letters. They're not in an envelope that nobody else can see. They're postcards. Everybody who handles that message along the way can read everything that's in there.
I really like the comparison between the postal service, about, messages on, emails and texts and interactions and communities and chat. Making that similarity between putting it on the back of a postcard and anyone that that handles that postcard along the way can read the back of it.
Right. So, and similarly, like restaurants that have bulletin boards, like Panera's has bulletin boards, like everybody, a lot of places have these like community bulletin boards. And it's like, hey, yeah, not only imagine, you're giving this postcard to somebody and their job is to go put it up on this like wall in Panera. It's like, that's what you're doing. And so everyone in the community can see it. Like, sometimes that's a good thing. That's how you find somebody to walk your dog. That's how you might find someone who, that's how you might find a job walking dogs. But at the same time, like maybe that's not how you want to send these pictures or talk to your friends. So I think there's a lot of parallels between the real world, like mail system and postcards and things and the virtual world. And it's easier for kids to sort of grok and get their heads wrapped around.
I think it's critical to be able to simplify it as much as possible because it's not even just about simplifying it for kids. It's also for the parents as well and the teachers. We need to have it simple messages that is something you can watch within, a few minutes, 2 to 5 minutes. That is very, very simplified version, so that parents. Because one of the things I remember years ago was actually looking at how to do security communication, and ultimately it got down to using simple, basically cartoon graphics. That's the best way to portray what you want them to learn. So I think getting into that simplification is really important. So let's kind of summarize up here. Let's take a kind of summary into to really what I think for me. I think what's really critical for parents is one is that to be involved, is to make sure that it's not a something as a baby teething type of thing where, here's something to entertain you while I do my thing. That's what not technology is about. It's about making sure that they use it, appropriately and that the parents are involved with that decision. They're involved with the content.
Right. We refer to that, by the way, as the digital nanny. Like that was
digital nanny. That's the same. Yeah, the baby teether. Here's a phone which is basically a dummy to keep you entertained for the next couple of hours, and that's what we got to get away from. We got to make sure that we use technology, embrace it for the good that it's there, and it means that as your kids are getting technology and you're giving them either for entertainment purposes or educational purposes, which is really important. I think first of all is to get a contract in place for your kid. Make sure that it's clear. Make sure that they understand about what's the purpose of the device. and make sure that you go through and turn on things off that you really don't want to. Learn about how to set different privacy modes, how to disable the EXIF information of photographs. Be involved when the kids are actually asking and wanting apps, and be the proxy for that. Don't let the kids decide which apps they want, because most cases they might actually be, security issues, or might be something that might have, really bad content, or there might be dual purpose types of apps. So be involved in the app decision, and also educate around, make sure that, as you mentioned, about when posting pictures and taking pictures, that understand about the process, what happens to those photos and where they get located. And then also make sure that, from password side, I think it's important that they just have a password and they keep it a secret. How complex that gets into, today. And, I think it's really important that they just use one, because many parents will just have it set without, which is quite concerning. I think it's just getting to the point where getting the kids used to having a password, then actually not having anything at all. So I think that's really important as well. So, Mike, any thoughts, any takeaways for parents?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, on the password one, I think one of the things that we did pretty early on, which, they're not guessable passwords, right? Like, hey, you know what? The kid has to remember it. Like, they're going to be guessable, but you can still come up with things that are not easy for a computer to crack if somebody doesn't know you. Like, for example, so we used a lot of our kids, when they were little, they had favorite toys, and those toys had names. Using those names, which are not easy, like they're generally, complex names. It's not just, dog and bear. Using those as passwords early on was a great way to sort of set that precedent of like, hey, it's a little bit longer. It involves 2 words or 3 words and maybe a number, usually 2 words and a number, and stuff like that. So I think that was pretty good. And they were able to, they're able to remember so much. Like I think people underestimate their kids' ability to remember. Their brains are so much better than ours at that type of stuff. The other thing I would say, and we didn't really touch on it too much, is there's a lot of device manufacturers out there that are building really good things. We mentioned Apple and Microsoft, but there's also for like home Wi-Fi, there's what you get by default here in the US from Verizon and from Comcast, are the 2 major ones, AT&T, others, which are meh, right? Those routers, they're decent. I'm not going to totally badmouth them, but if you look in the world, there are some really high quality ones out there that are super easy to set up, have all the controls that you need, can control it by device, can set time limits, can do all these things, and you can sort of set it and forget it. You can create guest networks so that when your kids' friends are over, they're on that network, and you can sort of control things. I think when you're going, you spend a couple hours doing the research up front, and it pays dividends over the course of the next 5 years, like or 2 years or whatever it is, however long you keep your routers for, or your devices for. And so I do think that time is well spent. And it's not like, you don't have to take the approach I take. You can take, like, my brother is a great example. He did enough research to find the thing, set it up, and now it's good. And like, I don't think he has to touch it very often. And that's, I think, an important part of it, is just taking the time to learn it for the period of time that you need to know it, set it up, and then a lot of things have come a long way to make it so that you don't have to constantly maintain it and tweak it and touch it. So definitely take that time when you're first getting the device to look into those things.
Yeah, just educate yourself. I think it's very important. Is take the time to learn and understand about what's, rather than choosing something just for the sake of price point, or sake of accepting what you're getting from even ISPs. You just take a little bit of a reviews and research into things that are very family or sharing friendly, that allows you to set the right controls. Because I completely agree, is that rather than trying to do it sometimes in every device, where kids are now having 3 or more devices and different things. That it's really easier to do it at the actually connection point, where they all connect into. It makes it much easier to control.
And also recognize, I mean, they're giving you that device for free. There's a reason. Like, unless you go in and tweak settings, the ISP actually has the ability to control that device. And so there's inexpensive all the way up to super expensive and they all have their various things, but a lot of them have really good parental controls or simple things that you can do. Change the DNS. There's a lot of things that you can do, even for free. That even on the ones that you do get from Verizon or Comcast or your ISP, whoever it may be. Go in, tweak a couple settings, change the DNS, and that's going to be like 80% of your problem. So definitely look into that. I would say.
Absolutely. So kind of final takeaways is that, parents out there, stay safe. Make sure you know what your kids are using. Promote the good for technology. Make sure it's all, it's around the educational side of things, using it for, social activities. And, the technology is there to embrace. But we have to make sure that they're using it, for the good purposes. So be involved, communicate, be open, allow the kids, to communicate to you, and also be involved with the teachers as well. I think it's really important that, this is a collective, it's a society thing that we all need to become working together, because my saying is that I'm only secure as the social sphere around me. And definitely from a kid's perspective, they're only secure as their social sphere, which also includes the kids that they're socializing with, the teachers and the parents. So let's work together. Let's get better educated. Let's make sure that for future generations, our kids and the future, that they are protected and safe, and that they use the devices for the good things that they're capable of. So, Mike, as always, it's great having the discussion with you. Hopefully, there's a lot of key takeaways. There's a lot of different things in this episode for everyone. So hopefully, that families and parents will listen and be able to make some changes in their life that will definitely benefit for good and make the internet a safer place for kids. So, Mike, always great, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks. Always, and thanks for joining me. I always enjoy these conversations.
Absolutely. Okay, and for the audience, a podcast 401 Access Denied comes every 2 weeks. So make sure that if you're interested in learning more, subscribe. Give us your feedback and comments of the things that you would think that would be good for kids to protect themselves, and for parents to know. Always make sure to share your feedback, share your comments, and we're always happy to take those. And even if you even want to be on the show, let us know. We'd be happy to invite you on and have a more detailed discussion. So stay safe, and catch us every 2 weeks in 401 Access Denied. Take care and bye.